The wind slammed into the side of the truck like a living thing howling across the mesa, rattling the windows and pushing dust in low, angry swirls across the frozen ground. Taji Nez braced against it as he stepped out, one boot crunching into the dry crust of snow that clung stubbornly to the earth around his grandfather's porch. He scanned the yard out of habit, quick sweep, left then right, shoulders squared like he was still on patrol. Kola jumped down beside him, landing with practiced grace, his large paws silent, even on the frozen soil. The dog's ears pricked forward, then flattened. A low growl rose in his throat, not loud but deep and vibrating like it came from somewhere far back in his chest. Taji stilled. It wasn't coyotes. It wasn't wind. Kola didn't growl at ghosts. Easy, he murmured, not because he thought the dog needed calming, but because he did. The rifle was still in the truck. He didn't reach for it. Not yet. The barn stood 30 yards ahead, sagging slightly at the center, the big double doors bowed inward like something inside had pushed once long ago and almost made it out. The sign above it, hand-carved by his grandfather decades back, read Nez Ranch, though most of the letters had worn to nothing. Kola refused to move forward. His eyes locked on the barn door, tail stiff as iron. His nose worked the windhead, tilting slightly as he caught something Taji couldn't. "You smell that?" he asked under his breath. "Yeah, me too." He could taste it, faint on the air oil rot. Something metallic. Not blood, but something old and wrong. The same smell that hung in barracks after the first round of artillery hit too close. The smell that lived in sweat-drenched shirts and nightmares. He hadn't been back in 18 years. Not since his father's funeral. The ranch had been left to his grandfather, and after Hastian Nez passed last month, the deed passed to Taji. He hadn't planned to stay. But now he wasn't so sure. The wind shifted. Kola barked once sharp and explosive, then bolted toward the barn. "Hold up!" Taji ran after him, boots skidding on the icy dirt. By the time he reached the barn, the dog was standing still again, statue still pressed low to the ground, nose inches from the space beneath the left door. His hackles rose slowly, and his teeth showed just enough to make the air feel tighter. Taji reached for the handle. It was rusted stiff. He had to brace one boot against the wood and yank twice before it gave with a groan loud enough to make crows scatter from the junipers. Darkness met him. Not just the absence of light, but a kind of cold, unmoving black. The kind that hung in deep wells and sealed bunkers. His fingers hovered at the edge of the frame. Kola didn't move. He took a slow breath and stepped inside. The light behind him died as the door creaked closed in the wind. His eyes adjusted. Shafts of dull gray sunlight pierced gaps in the roof. Dust swirled in slow motion, and in the center of the floor where the dirt was too smooth, where nothing grew, he saw it. A line of nails, clean, fresh, not rusted like the others, pounded into a floorboard that didn't match the rest. Taji crouched, ran his fingers along the edge. The board lifted easy, too easy. He paused. This felt like a moment that split things, before and after. One more breath, one more choice, and life didn't go back the way it came. He lifted the board. The smell hit him first, faint but sharp. Leather canvas and the distinct iron tang of old sweat. Beneath the board lay a crate military-issue wood reinforced with rusted brackets, the lid nailed shut and wrapped in a mold-dark tarp. Kola whined behind him, then backed toward the door. Taji knew that sound. The dog wasn't scared. He was trying to warn him. Don't. But he didn't listen. He pulled the tarp back, found the edge of the crate's lid, and pried it open with a crowbar that had been resting against the wall since he was a kid. The lid creaked. Inside, folded with deliberate care, was an army jacket, neatly pressed. Next to it, a bundle of yellowed papers bound with twine, and beneath them, dog tags. He picked them up, turned them over. Red Horse ML U.S. Army, OPOS Navajo Nation. His breath stopped. The name sat in his palm like weight. He knew that name. His father used to say it soft, usually after a drink, or in the quiet moments before sleep took him. Red Horse Matthew. He didn't come back. Taji flipped the tag. There, scratched into the back, jagged and uneven, were 4 words: he lied. He shot me. His hand closed around the metal instinctively. A wave of heat washed through his chest, followed by a tightening in his throat he couldn't swallow past. Kola barked again, this time louder. Taji spun. There was someone standing in the gap between the barn boards, just outside, a sliver of silhouette, watching. He stepped forward fast, kicked the door open wide, but there was no one there. Just wind and dust, the tree line in the distance, and the long stretch of empty silence that had followed him since he first set foot on this land. He waited, listening. Kola stayed low, ears back, tail still stiff. No wind blew now. Taji looked down at the tag again, his fingers tracing the scratched letters, like maybe they'd spell something else this time. They didn't. 100 questions pounded in his chest, none of them with answers. He put the tag in his pocket and stepped into the cold light, Kola beside him, eyes still locked on the place where the shadow had been. The ranch had always been quiet, but now it felt like it had been waiting. Not for someone to come home, for someone to find what was never supposed to be found. The house of a dead man shouldn't smell like pine soap and fresh coffee. Taji stood at the threshold of his grandfather's house boots, muddy blood humming with unease. The cold clung to his jacket, sharp as the smell of cedar bark and iron in his nostrils. Behind him, Kola sat like a shadow, tense, silent, his ears flicking back and forth as if listening to something no one else could hear. The door hadn't been locked. That alone wouldn't have rattled him. Hastian Nez didn't trust keys. He believed if someone wanted to steal from him, a lock wouldn't stop them, only shame or a shotgun would. But the smell. That clean, fresh scent that floated just inside the doorway, like someone had mopped the floor an hour ago, that was wrong. The last time Taji had been here, the air smelled of firewood and dust, a faint mix of sage and old leather soaked deep into the floorboards. Now the scent of pine cleaner sat too neatly over everything, like a fresh coat of paint hiding rot. He stepped in, slow, deliberate. The hardwood didn't creak beneath his boots. That was the second wrong thing. Hastian's floorboards had always groaned under weight. He used to joke the house complained when someone it didn't like walked across it. Kola followed at his heel, but stopped short once they crossed the threshold. His muscles stiffened, and his nose lifted to the air, like he was trying to catch something invisible and bitter. He let out a small chuff, then turned sharply toward the hallway that led to the back rooms. Ears pinned forward, tail low. Taji glanced that way, but didn't follow the dog just yet. He made himself look at the room instead, the one he had spent summers in as a boy, the one that used to smell like fry bread, newspaper ink, and tobacco. The place was clean, too clean. The kind of clean that took effort and attention. On the table by the window sat a ceramic mug half full and a plate with a folded napkin. The edges were crisp, like someone had just finished breakfast and stepped out to grab wood for the fire. But there was no fire. The stove was cold. The only warmth in the room came from the light angling through the front window, and even that was watery and thin. He touched the back of the chair at the table. It was still warm. His pulse quickened. There were no footprints on the floor, no boots by the door, no sign of anyone living here. Yet the house didn't feel empty. It felt paused. A photograph hung above the stone fireplace, the same one that had been there since Taji was 6. His father, Thomas Nez, stood beside another man in fatigues, arms slung around each other's shoulders, both squinting into sunlight with young, unlined faces. His father had written on the back of the photo once, Camp Leatherneck, 79. But it was the man next to him who held Taji's attention now. Matthew Redhorse, the same name on the dog tag in his pocket. His throat tightened. He didn't remember the man except in glimpses. A deep voice, a shadow by the truck, laughter during a storm. But he remembered the way his father spoke of him after the deployment. Quietly. Sometimes not at all. Behind him, Kola let out a short, sharp bark. Taji spun around. The hallway stood empty, but the air had changed. Denser now. He moved toward the sound hand resting at his side out of habit, though there was no weapon there. Just instinct and unease. Kola stood in the center of the hallway, body rigid, nose pointed toward the back bedroom. His tail twitched once. Then he growled low, steady. Taji held still, ears straining for sound. None came. No creaking boards. No whispered breath. He stepped forward. The hallway was lined with more photos, most of them yellowed by sunlight. His grandfather in uniform. His father standing next to a horse. Taji himself, age 7, holding up a trout with 2 hands, grin wide, shirt wet. He passed the bathroom door, still smelled of soap and earth. The next door, his grandfather's bedroom, was open. The bed was made, the sheets tucked sharp. A worn blue shirt hung over the back of a chair, still creased at the elbows. On the nightstand sat a carved wooden bird, unfinished. Taji remembered the way his grandfather used to whittle when the power went out. Said it calmed his hands. A noise made him turn. Not loud, not threatening, just a soft thump. A weight shifting somewhere deeper in the house, or a memory waking up. He stepped back into the hallway, heart ticking faster now. Kola barked again, twice this time, his signal for movement. Taji scanned every shadow, every beam of pale winter light. Nothing moved, but it didn't feel empty. That's what made his skin crawl. The air wasn't just still, it was listening. He turned slowly, retracing his steps toward the main room. Kola followed, never turning his back on the hallway. As they reached the front door, another sound stopped him. Metal on metal. Not loud, but deliberate. He turned just in time to see the spoon fall from the table to the floor. He hadn't touched it. It clattered once, then spun in a tight, slow circle before coming to rest. Kola barked and bolted to the door, pawing at it like he wanted out, or like he knew something was still in here with them. Taji's fingers found the edge of the table. He steadied himself. Cold sweat traced his spine. A shape flickered across the window. Just for a second. A shadow or a person. He moved fast, yanking the door open. There on the porch stood a man in a dark coat, tall and lean face lined by wind and time. His breath steamed in the cold air. "Evening sun," he said, voice flat as old gravel. It took a moment for Taji to place the face. Older now. Grayer. "Sheriff Begay." Cal nodded, eyes drifting past Taji into the room. "House looks good," he said. "I haven't cleaned a thing," Taji replied. "That's what worries me." Kola growled low, standing between them now. Cal's eyes narrowed. "That dog smells it too." "Smells what?" The sheriff hesitated, then took one slow step forward, boots scraping the porch. "You shouldn't be here after dark. Not until you know what your grandfather was hiding." A gust of wind swept across the porch, lifting loose snow from the edges. Inside, the spoon moved again, just a nudge this time, like a breath. Taji turned back toward the living room. Kola hadn't moved, and neither had the shadows inside the house. But they were watching. He felt it, and so did the dog. Cal's voice dropped to a near whisper. "You're not alone on this land, son, and you never were." The crate didn't creak when he opened it, like it had been waiting for him. Taji stood in the barn again before sunrise, wrapped in the same coat that had seen 2 deployments and too many deaths. The cold was worse this morning, settling into the joints, stiff in the breath. Kola padded silently beside him, his body low to the ground, the fur along his back raised just slightly. Neither of them had slept much. Sheriff Begay's warning still echoed in his mind, but not as loud as the name scratched into the tag in his pocket. Red Horse. M.L. The silence in the barn was not the peaceful kind. It was the silence of held breath, the silence right before something steps out of the dark. Taji crossed the plank floor, avoiding the soft spots by instinct. The sun wasn't up yet, but enough gray light filtered through the cracked slats in the siding to see the outline of the crate again, buried under a tarp and wedged between the ribs of the old foundation. The board he'd pulled up yesterday still sat crooked near the wall, a mess of nails and dirt beside it. He knelt again, brushing the remaining dust off the lid. It was military issue all right, standard dimensions, heavy reinforced corners. Too big to be for tools, too small for gear packs. He reached for the crowbar resting on the nearby workbench. The metal felt colder than the air. Kola growled behind him, but didn't move forward. Taji slid the bar beneath the edge of the crate lid and leaned into it, slow and steady. The nails gave way with soft groans, too soft. Not the brittle screech of something rusted shut. Not the resistance of age. These nails had been hammered in recently. Maybe weeks ago, maybe days. The lid shifted. Taji exhaled and lifted it. No creak, no dust plume, no smell of rot. Just silence. Inside, the contents were arranged with care. A folded military field jacket, olive drab creases sharp. A stack of yellowed documents wrapped in twine. A rusted canteen dented on one side. And resting atop them like an accusation were the dog tags he'd seen the night before. He picked them up again, turned them in the pale light. Red Horse M.L. The back still held the same 4 words etched deep into the metal. He lied. He shot me. Taji's hand clenched before he realized he was doing it. He looked at the documents, tempted to tear the twine and read. But he didn't, not yet. Instead, his attention was drawn to a photograph folded between the pages. He eased it free. 3 men in uniform standing in front of a battered Humvee, desert wind in their hair and dust on their boots. His father, Thomas Nez, was one of them. Younger, sharper around the edges. On his left stood Matthew Redhorse. The third man Taji didn't recognize. His grandfather wasn't in the picture, but somehow his presence was there in the silence behind their eyes. Kola gave a short, guttural bark. Taji turned quickly. The barn door stood ajar. He'd closed it behind them. He was sure of it. He reached for the flashlight clipped to his belt and scanned the shadows near the entrance. The beam cut across broken tools, baling wire, a stack of feed bags so old they had collapsed into dust. Then movement. Not big, not a figure, just shift. A flutter in the far corner, like breath disturbing a curtain. But there was no wind inside. Not a draft strong enough to move anything. Kola advanced a few paces, body rigid. Taji rose, slowly slid the photo into his coat pocket, and kept the flashlight steady. He approached the corner boots, careful on the planks. Nothing. No animal tracks. No prints. But the smell was stronger here, earth rust, something faintly sour like old sweat soaked into canvas. He stepped back, looking around. The sense of being watched hadn't left him since he arrived. He told himself it was the ranch, the memories, the unease of ghosts made by grief and time. But the spoon that moved on its own, the shadow on the porch, the way Kola tracked something unseen every hour of the night. This wasn't just memory. It was presence. He turned back to the crate, pulled the rest of the items free carefully. Beneath the jacket, he found a second set of tags. They belonged to someone named Elias Yazzie. He paused, eyebrows knitting. He knew that name. Not from childhood. From a deployment list. Yazzie had been MIA for years, and now his tag was here. He replaced the lid gently, stepping back from the crate. The light was shifting now, orange, bleeding through the cracked slats. Morning. But it didn't bring warmth. Kola barked again, louder this time, turning sharply toward the trees beyond the barn. Taji followed his gaze. A figure stood at the edge of the woods. Tall. Still. Coat heavy collar up, face in shadow. Taji stepped outside, boots thudding on packed dirt. "Hey," he called, hand instinctively moving toward where a sidearm would be, if this were still the war. The figure didn't move, just stood there, half covered in the shifting fog that rose from the canyon beyond. Kola barked again. Then finally the man turned, slowly, and walked back into the trees. Not hurried, not afraid. Like he'd seen what he came to see, and was done for now. Taji watched until the fog swallowed the last trace of him, then turned back to the barn. The air inside felt thicker now. He took one last glance at the crate. It wasn't finished. That much he knew. And neither was the story it had just started to tell. Some stories die with our elders. Others hide in barns, waiting for fools like you to dig them up. The wind had shifted by midday, warmer but heavy with dust and old sage. Taji stood in front of the ranch house, his sleeves rolled to the elbows, hands dirty from turning over more of the barn's floor. The second crate was heavier than the first, tucked beneath a warped section of wood behind a stack of rusted tack. He hadn't opened it yet. He hadn't needed to. The moment he'd touched it, something in his gut turned over like the quiet hum before a tremor. Kola hadn't stopped pacing since. Now standing at the fence line was Nina Yazzie. Taji squinted into the sun. "I almost didn't recognize you." She smiled, small and sad. "You haven't changed much. Just more scars, maybe." He looked down at his hands, then back up. "You came all this way just to insult me. I came because you poked something that didn't want to be unearthed." Nina stepped through the gate. She wore a dark canvas jacket, a leather satchel slung across her chest, and her long braid tucked inside a scarf. Her boots were caked in red dust, as if she'd walked here from the canyon floor. "I heard you were back," she said. "And I heard the sheriff's been out here twice already. I guess news travels fast. Faster when it comes with ghosts." Kola came to her side, sniffed her boots, then sat close, tail still. He remembered her. Taji could see it in the way his ears flicked once, then relaxed. Animals didn't forget the way people did. She followed him to the barn, stopping just short of the open doors. "I know that look," she said. "What look?" "The one that says you're about to show me something you probably shouldn't." He didn't answer. Instead, he lifted the tarp on the second crate. This one had no markings. Just a series of iron nails hammered tight across the top, their heads shinier than the wood. "I haven't opened it yet," he said. Nina looked at the nails. You sure you want to? I'm not sure about anything anymore. She was silent for a while, eyes resting on the box. Then she stepped closer and pulled a folded pocket knife from her jacket. Then let's open it together. Taji pried at the corner while Nina worked at the nails. Each one came up clean. Not rusted. Not old. Whoever had sealed this did it recently. When the last nail came free, they lifted the lid as one. Inside, wrapped in a frayed army blanket, was the unmistakable outline of a body too small for a man, too long for a child. The shape of someone who'd curled up before dying, knees bent, arms drawn in. The smell wasn't fresh, but it wasn't decay either. Just dust. Earth. Time. Taji swallowed. You know who this is? Nina didn't answer. She reached in slowly and pulled free a second set of dog tags tangled in a web of stringy cloth. She read them silently. Then again. Then she dropped them like they burned. Her voice cracked. Matthew Redhorse. My uncle. Taji felt his spine go cold. You're sure I know that name better than I know my own? Her hands trembled. My family never got his body back. They said he went MIA during a classified mission. No one would talk. They said it was friendly fire, but no one would say who pulled the trigger. He pulled the first set of tags from his coat pocket. These were in the other crate. Same name. Same message scratched on the back. She took them, read the words. He lied. He shot me. Nina stared down at the body wrapped in olive green. They buried him like he didn't matter. Like a box of junk. You think my grandfather did this? I don't know, she said. But I know he was there. So was your father. Taji felt the old anger rising in his chest, but it had nowhere to go. He stared down at the remains, his jaw clenched. Nina stepped back, breathing hard. Have you heard of Operation Black Coyote Number? It was supposed to be a recon op, she said. Late 70s. Cold War paranoia. They trained a small unit of Diné and Lakota soldiers in the canyons out here, said they were tracking Soviet proxies moving through the desert. Nobody ever proved it. The whole mission disappeared. My uncle was in that unit. So was your father. So was Hastian Nez. Taji looked at the box again. So what happened out there? She shook her head. They all came back changed except the ones who didn't come back at all. My mother said Matthew was different after his last letter. Said he was scared. Not of the mission. Of the men he was with. He rubbed his face. You think they killed him? I think something happened that none of them were willing to talk about. And now it's back, clawing its way out of the ground. Kola barked once, sharp and loud. They both turned. At the edge of the barn stood a man, thin frame, dark coat boots caked in dust. He didn't speak, just stared at them, face unreadable. Who the hell? Taji stepped forward. The man spoke, voice rough and hollow. That body you found, that's my father. Nina gasped. He stepped into the light, his face drawn, eyes sunken. My name's Chaska Redhorse. Taji stood frozen. You're Matthew's son. Chaska nodded once. And you? He looked at Taji like something sharp and bitter. You're the one protecting the men who buried him. I'm not protecting anyone. No, Chaska glanced down at the open crate. Because from where I'm standing, you dug up the truth and still haven't done a damn thing about it. Kola let out a low growl. Nina stepped between them. Nobody's hiding anything. We just found him. We were about to. Chaska cut her off. I've waited 20 years to bury my father. Now I find out he was dumped in a barn like a broken tool. You don't get to ask for patience. Taji held his ground. If you're here for answers, so am I. Chaska's jaw twitched. Then maybe we start with who pulled the trigger. Your grandfather. Or your father. The air in the barn thickened. Dust motes hung like ash. Taji didn't answer. He didn't know how to. Chaska turned and walked out without another word, boots silent across the dirt. Kola watched him go, ears still back. Nina knelt by the crate again, voice quiet. There's more to this. Taji nodded, but all he could think about now was the last man in that photograph, the one whose name he still didn't know, and whether there was another crate somewhere with his story inside it too. Truth doesn't haunt you like ghosts. It waits like a landmine. Taji watched Chaska's silhouette shrink into the dust and fog boots crunching down the slope toward the creek. He hadn't looked back once. The barn was still open behind him. The second crate remained half-covered by its tarp, the remains inside just barely visible under the folds of the army blanket. Kola stood guard beside it, ears swiveling, body tense. Nina had retreated into the house. She said she needed air, but Taji knew the truth. She needed space from grief and maybe space from him too. She had wept silently after Chaska left, shoulders trembling, her fingers pressed hard against her lips like she could keep the sorrow from spilling out. Now Taji stood alone, both feet planted in the soil of his childhood, staring at a corpse he never expected to find, and a past he no longer trusted. The tags were still in his coat pocket. Redhorse's voice was louder than it had been yesterday, not in words, but in the unrelenting pressure of those 4 jagged letters scratched by a dying hand. He lied. He shot me. Taji pulled the field journal from the first crate, the one he hadn't opened yet. It was smaller than he remembered, wrapped in black oilskin and tied with frayed string. He sat on the workbench and undid the knot with deliberate fingers. The cover was cracked and dry. Inside, the first few pages were empty, like the man had started and stopped too many times. Then the handwriting appeared tight, slanted, deliberate. March 12, 1979. We touched down east of Big Water. No names, no insignia. 8 of us. Only 2 Navajo. Me and Redhorse. Elias Yazzie from Lukachukai joined us late. Said it was training, but nobody trains like this. Taji flipped through. The entries grew darker, more frantic. Details blurred with suspicion. March 18, 1979. Orders changed. We're not tracking anything. They're watching us more than whatever's in the canyon. Redhorse says something's wrong. He watches our 6 like we're already in enemy territory. Then the one that made him stop breathing. March 21, 1979. Yazzie threatened to report what he saw. Said it wasn't right. Accused Thomas of covering something up. Said he'd go to the press. That night he vanished. Just gone. Cal said he must have walked out. But I saw the blood near the rocks. Taji's hands tightened around the edge of the book. His father, Thomas Nez, the man who taught him how to gut a fish and clean a rifle, the man who told bedtime stories about loyalty and courage. Was he part of this? Page turned again, and one line stared back at him. Matthew tried to stop them. They turned on him next. Kola barked loud and urgent. Taji looked up. A shadow darted past the barn's side window. He stood instantly, journal still in hand. Kola moved toward the door with stiff-legged focus. Taji followed him into the light. The sun was low now, touching the ridgeline with streaks of orange and crimson. But the air had changed colder, heavier. Movement came from the other side of the house. Fast. Taji rushed toward it, rounding the corner just as something sharp cracked through the stillness. A gunshot. Then a yelp, Kola. Taji ran. The dog had staggered near the brush behind the well. One leg lifted, blood dripping from his flank. He was still upright, but limping badly, his growl guttural, primal. Taji dropped beside him, hands moving automatically. The wound was shallow, grazed by the round. Not deep, but enough to bleed hard. Kola licked his wrist, once eyes never leaving the trees. Taji looked up just in time to catch the retreating figure, dark coat fast stride ducking into the trees. He didn't need a second look. Chaska. He stood slowly, fury pulsing like heat through his neck. But something didn't sit right. Why shoot the dog? Why now? And why run? He looked down at Kola. Stay. The dog didn't argue. He collapsed slowly, panting. Taji turned back toward the barn. Nina was coming down the porch, breath sharp. I heard, "Oh God." She dropped to her knees by Kola hands, already reaching for the med kit she carried in her satchel. What happened? Someone was out back. Took a shot. I think it was Chaska. Why would he? I don't know, Taji snapped. But I'm going to find out. He stalked back toward the barn and grabbed the flashlight. Before he could step out again, his foot hit something. A piece of paper had fluttered loose from inside the crate. It must have been tucked beneath Red Horse's jacket. He picked it up. A map, drawn by hand, faded with time. Coordinates scrawled in one corner. But more than that, a phrase written along the margin in rushed pen, they never found the second grave. Taji stood frozen, another body, another burial, another secret. He looked toward the mountains. The map pointed southeast, toward Chuska Creek. The memory surfaced then. He was 10, maybe 11. His father had taken him fishing near that creek, but told him not to wander past the bend. The water runs wrong there, he'd said. Stay where I can see you. Taji remembered feeling cold there, even in summer. Remembered the silence. His breath slowed. He folded the map and slid it into his jacket. Then he walked back to Nina and Kola. She was cleaning the wound with water, her hands shaking only slightly. I'm going, he said. She didn't look up. Where Chuska Creek? You can't just go alone. Not with him out there. Taji crouched beside her. His voice was quiet but hard. He's not the one I'm worried about anymore. She looked at him, then seeing the same weight she'd seen in her uncle's eyes the week before he vanished. What's out there? She asked. Taji touched the edge of the map through his coat. The part of the story they didn't bury deep enough. Behind him, the sun slipped lower behind the mesa, and somewhere out past the hills, the past was waiting silent and unfinished. A wound doesn't always bleed. Sometimes it walks upright and speaks your name like it owns it. The sky turned steel gray as Taji made his way through the draw, the sun already gone behind the ridge. Chuska Creek lay just a few hundred yards ahead, its voice a low murmur under the wind. The path was narrow, carved by runoff, and years of erosion, but he knew it well. His boots fell into the same grooves he'd walked as a boy, back when his father still spoke softly, and nothing had yet been broken. The trees thickened as he approached the bend, where the creek turned hard against the cliff face and disappeared into the rocks. The air grew colder there, heavier. The kind of cold that lived in bone memory, not just weather. Kola wasn't with him. He was resting back at the house, bandaged and still groggy from the shot. Nina had begged him to wait. You're rushing into something that isn't finished, she said. Taji had only nodded. She was right. But that didn't matter anymore. He crouched beside the water, pulled out the map from his coat pocket. The hand-drawn marks pointed to a small outcrop just beyond the creek's split. From this side, it looked like nothing, just sagebrush and stone. But something about the shadows there didn't move like the rest of the world. He crossed the water in 2 long steps, boots slipping slightly on the slick rocks. At the base of the outcrop was a depression in the earth. Shallow, just enough to be unnatural. A tangle of roots pushed through the soil like veins, and part of the rock wall had been chipped away by hand. Taji stood still, breathing hard. Then came the sound. Footsteps behind him. He turned fast. Chaska Redhorse stood 10 feet away, rifle in hand. Not raised, not lowered. Just there. "You don't walk this far from the house without a reason," Chaska said. His voice was flat but not calm. "I didn't shoot the dog," Taji replied. "I know, that stopped him." "Then why run?" "Because you were going to shoot me," Chaska said. "I wasn't. You would've." They stood in silence, the creek whispering between them. Chaska's face looked older than it should. Worn not just by grief, but by carrying it for too long. His eyes flicked down to the map, still in Taji's hand. "You found it," he said. Taji nodded. "This where they buried him," one of them, Chaska replied. "The others still waiting." Taji looked back at the hollow in the rock. "You dug this, I started to. Then I stopped." "Why?" "Because I didn't want to see if it was true." Taji stepped forward. "You said you wanted answers." "I wanted vengeance," Chaska corrected. "But that doesn't fit like it used to." Taji dropped to one knee and began clearing the earth. It wasn't deep. Someone had already done most of the work. A few minutes in, his hand struck wood. He brushed the soil back. Not a military crate this time. An old cedar box splintered in places, the lid warped from years of pressure. He pulled gently at the edge until it gave way with a sigh, like something exhaling after a long time buried. Inside were bones, wrapped in what remained of an olive-drab poncho liner, half a boot, a rusted canteen, and one more pair of dog tags. He pulled them free. Yazzie E. U.S. Army O. Powes Navajo Nation. Chaska let out a long, low breath. "So it's true." Taji looked up. "Your father didn't kill him." Chaska didn't respond. He just crouched beside the box, head bowed. "He tried to stop it," Taji said quietly. "That's why they buried him too." The wind shifted, carrying a smell of juniper and damp stone. Taji rose and stepped back, letting Chaska take his time. He moved toward the water to rinse the dirt from his hands. The cold numbed his skin instantly. Above him, the sky split with a single crack of thunder, distant, but promising more. Chaska joined him a moment later. His hands were empty. "Two dead," he said. Both silenced. "And the rest stayed quiet," Taji added. Chaska nodded. "Because they thought silence was safer." Taji stared at the tags. Yazzie tried to expose something. Redhorse backed him. "And my father. He stood by and let it happen." "You think he pulled the trigger?" "I don't know," Taji said. "But he let it happen. That's enough." Chaska crouched, fingers touching the water like it might carry the weight for him. "He died a hero, didn't he?" "That's what they said." Taji nodded. "They said the same about mine." They stood there as the light faded, the truth settling between them like ash. "You bury a body. You better bury the truth with it," Chaska said. "But truth doesn't rot." "No," Taji said. "It waits." They didn't speak for a while, just listened to the water, The wind, the groaning of old trees under the weight of secrets. Then Chaska straightened. So what now? We take them home. Chaska looked at him. You mean to the ranch? To the people, Taji said. To the families. To the fire. We don't leave them out here. Chaska nodded slowly. They began wrapping the bones with care. Taji's movements were steady, practiced like every burial detail he'd ever been assigned, came back in that moment. Chaska worked silently, fingers trembling once when he folded the edge of the liner over Yazi's skull. By the time they were done, night had claimed the canyon. The stars blinked through the clouds, and the wind softened. As they stood gathering the last of their tools, a rustling sound came from the trees behind them. Both men turned. A shape moved between the trunks, slow, deliberate. Kola, limping but walking. Nina followed behind him, flashlight, low face, pale in the moonlight. I figured you wouldn't wait, she said. Taji smiled faintly. You figured right. She looked past him to the box, then to Chaska. Nobody spoke. They didn't need to. In silence, they carried the bones out of the canyon, the light from Nina's flashlight bobbing through the dark, and the dog's soft huff of breath, the only sound besides their boots on stone. The past was still out there, but now it wasn't buried. They weren't just buried in the ground. They were buried in the silence of everyone who walked away and never looked back. The fire crackled inside the pit behind the Nay ranch house, the smell of piñon smoke rising slow into the dark. Taji sat with his back to the wind, hands wrapped around a battered mug of black coffee. Kola rested beside him, head on his paws, one bandaged leg stretched out in the dirt. The dog hadn't let Taji out of his sight since they returned from Chuska Creek. He understood. They'd dug up more than bones out there. Across the fire sat Nina and Chaska. The box with Yazi's remains lay wrapped in canvas beside them, silent and weighty. Red Horse's bones rested in the barn, guarded now more by memory than by need. Nobody had said much since they returned. But silence wasn't empty tonight. It was thick, heavy. The kind of silence that comes when something sacred is near and no one dares to speak first. Finally, Nina looked up. Her eyes reflected the fire, but her voice was calm. My uncle used to say that if a man can't speak the truth, his bones will whisper it in the dark. Chaska shifted. He was right. Taji took a slow sip. We have to tell people. The families. The tribe, the VA board. Somebody. Who's going to believe it? Chaska asked. 2 crates buried in a barn and a canyon, a field journal with half the pages torn out. They'll believe it when they see the tags, the uniforms, the records. There's enough left to put the pieces together. You really want to put this in the hands of outsiders? Chaska's voice tightened. Let them turn it into a report and file it under regrettable incidents. We're not handing it to Washington, Taji said. We're bringing it home. Nina nodded. To the tribal council first, then to the families. That's how it has to be. A gust of wind swept through the yard, blowing sparks up into the dark sky. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped once, then fell quiet. The sound made Taji's gut tighten. Something still wasn't settled. He set the mug down. We need to talk to someone who was there. Chaska raised an eyebrow. Your father's dead. So is mine. So is Yazi. That leaves one man. They all looked toward the house. Sheriff Cal Begay. He had been there. Not just in the cleanup, but in the mission itself. His name hadn't appeared in the field journal, but his face did, tucked in the corner of the final photograph, half-shadowed, younger, but unmistakable. I'll call him, Taji said, standing. No, Nina said, rising with him. We go in person, tonight. Chaska frowned. You think he'll talk? He came to the ranch once already, Nina said. He's watching the same ghosts we are. Taji nodded. Let's finish this. The road to Cal Begay's house curved down through sandstone hills and into the canyon mouth where scattered pines clung to the red rock. His house stood alone on a low-rise porch light flickering, like it couldn't decide whether to stay lit or give up for the night. Taji parked 100 yards back. He didn't want to give Cal time to hide. The three of them walked in silence up the gravel path. Kola limped beside Taji, refusing to stay behind. As they reached the porch, the door opened before they could knock. Cal stood in the frame, his face pale in the yellow light. No badge now. Just an old man in a wool shirt, sleeves rolled boots, worn thin at the toes. His eyes were sharp but tired. I figured it was you, he said. You going to let us in? Tajia asked. Cal stepped aside. Inside the house smelled of cedar ash and black coffee. A pot simmered on the stove and papers were scattered across the table like he'd been waiting for this. Chaska walked in last, keeping his distance. Cal poured 3 cups without asking. Sit. Taji stayed standing. We found them. Both of them. Cal didn't flinch. Yazzie and Red Horse. You knew I was the one who buried Yazzie. Cal said. Not by choice, but I was there. The room dropped into silence. Cal didn't look at them. He stirred his coffee once, then set the spoon aside. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. The op was a cover. Training, they said. Surveillance. But when Yazzie started asking questions about where the money went, about the off-book equipment, they branded him a threat. Said he compromised the mission. Who pulled the trigger? Taji asked. Cal finally met his eyes. Your father. The words landed like a rifle crack. Taji didn't move. He didn't want to, Cal added. But he followed the order. From who Cal looked down. Hastian Nez. Taji felt something twist deep inside. My grandfather. He wasn't the quiet rancher everyone remembers, Cal said. He was deep in that unit. Led most of the shadow runs through this region. Never left a paper trail, but he held more sway than the officers on paper. Chaska spoke up, voice raw. And Red Horse? He fought back, Cal said. After Yazzie died, he tried to record what happened. Told Thomas he was going public. That night he vanished. I found his tags a week later, stashed in a field pack. I buried what was left in the barn. Taji shook his head. And you never said a word. I was 23, Cal said. Still green. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I could protect people by keeping it quiet. Protect who Nina asked. The murderers. Your families, he snapped. The ones who would have been dragged through hearings and shame. The ones who were already breaking under the weight of war. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Taji set his coffee down. We're taking it to the council. All of it. Cal nodded slowly. I won't stop you. You'll come with us, Nina said. He hesitated, then nodded again. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. The silence had cracked, and tomorrow the truth would speak. You can dig up the dead, but truth needs witnesses to breathe. The tribal council hall sat at the edge of shiprock, framed by sandstone cliffs and winter-stripped cottonwoods. Morning light had barely cracked the sky, casting long shadows over the gravel lot, but the lot was already half full. Word had spread. Whether through whispers or wind, the story had made its way across the mesas and into the kitchens and firesides of the community. Inside the hall, the benches creaked under the weight of elders and veterans, families and farmers. Some came in silence, brows furrowed. Others spoke in low murmurs, hands wringing caps or prayer beads. At the front of the room under the tribal seal sat the council. Taji stood with the others near a table laid out with proof photographs, dog tags, the journal, and 2 sealed crates draped in wool blankets. Sheriff Cal Begay stood slightly apart, eyes shadowed, hat in hand. The room hushed as Councilwoman Ruth Yazzie stepped forward. Her gray braid lay over one shoulder, her eyes sharp beneath thick glasses. "I've been asked to open this gathering to a matter of weight and consequence," she said. "We don't call meetings like this lightly, but it seems the land has yielded up more than bones. It's yielded a reckoning." Taji stepped forward. His voice didn't shake, though his fingers itched to. "My name is Taji Nez. My father, Thomas Nez, served with Matthew Redhorse and Elias Yazzie in a covert unit during the Cold War. They trained here in our canyons. They disappeared from history in 1979. We were told they died in service. That's only half true." He held up the field journal. "This was found buried in a crate under the barn at my grandfather's ranch, along with remains. We've since recovered both sets. One from the barn, one from Chuska Creek." A ripple went through the room. Heads turned, a few gasps. Nina stepped beside him. The names scratched on their tags weren't just for show. Redhorse wrote his own message before he died, before someone shot him and buried him without a marker. He wrote he lied. He shot me. Chaska stepped forward next. His hands were clenched, but his voice was steady. "That man was my father. I grew up believing he'd died a soldier, but he was executed by his own." Cal stepped forward last. He placed his hat on the table. "I was there," he said. "Not when they were killed, but when we covered it up. I buried Elias Yazzie under orders. I knew what I was doing. I was young. I thought I was protecting people. I was wrong." The room fell into silence again, heavier than before. Councilwoman Yazzie turned to the other members. "You've heard what they said. Now we must hear from the people." An elder rose from the second bench. His name was Jolon Tso, a Vietnam vet. His voice carried decades of smoke and pain. "We've all known things didn't add up back then, but we were told to let it go, not to dishonor the living. But that silence dishonored the dead." A woman stood next to her, hands trembling. "Elias was my brother. We waited years for his return. My mother lit a fire for him every night until she passed. She never stopped waiting." Others began rising, some in support, some in anger. "What do we do with this now?" someone asked. "What justice is left to give?" Taji stepped forward again. "We tell the truth. We record it. We make sure their names aren't lost. We bring their spirits home the right way. And we make sure this kind of silence never settles in again." A man in uniform rose, Commander Mike Chi of the Veterans Affairs Office. "There are processes we can begin. Formal recognition, posthumous awards, a full investigation. But it begins here with your permission, with the tribe's will." Councilwoman Yazzie looked over the gathering. "All those in favor of beginning a formal tribal inquiry into the deaths of Elias Yazzie and Matthew Redhorse and submitting findings to the Navajo Nation Veterans Administration and the Department of Defense, raise your hand." Nearly every hand lifted. She nodded, eyes shining. "Then let it be so. And let this truth find the wind." After the council adjourned, the crowd didn't disperse right away. People came forward offering names, memories, even rumors passed down from family. One woman recalled a letter her uncle had received in 1980, signed only M. It had spoken of betrayal and silence. Every word now felt like a thread, one they were finally beginning to weave into something whole. Outside, Taji stood with Nina and Chaska beside the truck. The crates were loaded in the back, ready to be taken to the ceremonial site for the cleansing fire and proper burial rites. The sun had risen fully now, cutting through the morning frost and painting the cliffs in soft gold. "You sure you're ready for this?" Nina asked quietly. "No," Taji admitted. "But I don't think that matters anymore." Chaska pulled a folded photograph from his jacket, the same one from the crate. 3 young men standing in a war zone, grinning like they had their whole lives ahead of them. He held it up, staring at it a moment. Then he tucked it into the front breast pocket of his shirt. "They deserved more than this," he said. "They're getting it now," Nina replied. Taji looked across the lot. Cal was leaning against his own truck, head bowed, fingers pinching the bridge of his nose. "I don't think this ends with Red Horse and Yazzie," Taji said. "There's more. More names. More places." "We'll find them," Nina said. "One by one." Taji looked up at the cliffs, the wind carrying the scent of sage and ash. They thought they could bury the truth forever. Chaska shook his head. "But the land remembers." And behind them the fire still burned in the council hall's hearth, steady and alive. Even when the truth comes out, the damage it did in silence doesn't disappear. The sun had dipped low by the time the burial fires were lit. 2 mounds of earth, smoothed by hand, sat between the cottonwoods behind the ceremonial grounds, wrapped in cedar smoke and prayer. The Red Horse and Yazzie families stood shoulder to shoulder, no words left, just songs, old ones that reached backward through bloodlines and dust. Taji knelt by the second grave. He placed the journal down, gently wrapped in fresh cloth, tucked just beneath the final layer of soil. Not to hide it, but to return it to where it belonged. The words inside had served their purpose. The rest would live in memory now. Nina stood beside him. Her scarf had slipped from her braid, dark strands loose in the wind. She didn't speak, but her hand rested lightly on his shoulder. That said more than enough. A few feet away, Chaska watched the flames. His arms were crossed tight, eyes hollowed by more than grief. There was something still brewing beneath his silence. Taji had seen it before in other men, other wars. It didn't end when the body was buried. It just changed shape. After the final song, most began to leave. People hugged quietly, lingering by the fires. Cal Begay stayed back too, leaning on a walking stick he hadn't needed until today. He looked like a man who'd laid down a burden, but hadn't yet figured out how to live without it. Taji approached him as the others dispersed. Kola followed, limping slightly, but alert, again tail low. "You stayed," Taji said. "I owed them that," Cal replied. "They forgave you," Taji said. "I saw it in their faces." Cal looked down at the dirt. "That's not the same as forgiving myself. You're still sheriff." Cal laughed just once. "Not for long. I handed in my resignation this morning. Effective end of the month." Taji frowned. Why, Cal met his eyes. "Because there's more coming. And it should be you who handles it." Taji didn't respond right away. "You think I want to wear your badge?" he asked. "I think you already are," Cal said. "Without the paperwork." Taji turned his eyes back to the flames. "We're not done." "No," Cal said. "You're not." Nina joined them, then arms folded, eyes scanning the darkening sky. "You were right, Taji, about there being more." Chaska walked up behind her holding something wrapped in cloth. He handed it over without a word. It was another field pack, old worn, still marked with army stencil. The canvas was stained frayed at the edges. "Where did you get this?" Taji asked. "Came from my aunt's place," Chaska said. She'd been holding on to it for years. Said my father sent it in the mail just before he disappeared. Never opened it. She was too afraid. Taji sat on a nearby bench unwrapping it slowly. Inside were papers, dozens of them. Some typed, some handwritten. Field notes, maps, orders with redacted names, and one photograph folded tightly, edges crumbling. He opened it. It was the same group: Red Horse, Yazzie, his father, Cal, and one more man, Hastian Nez, Taji's grandfather. But this time he wasn't in the background. He stood front and center, smiling. That smile twisted something in Taji's chest. On the back of the photo in faded pencil, "Watch the one who smiles the most. He has the darkest plan." Chaska leaned in. "There's a logbook. Mentions a third disappearance." "A third?" Nina asked. "Not Red Horse. Not Yazzie." Taji flipped through the stack. A page caught his attention. Recon route altered. Target acquisition failed. Elias reported seeing unauthorized assets near Antelope Wash. He confronted HN next day. Disappeared that night. Nina read over his shoulder. Unauthorized assets could be anything, Cal said. Smuggling. Illegal weapons. Off-the-books testing. Chaska nodded. "There's an old story my father told me once. Said some men came back from the field claiming they'd seen something they weren't supposed to, military gear stashed in canyon caves. Not government-issued. He said they talked about oil drums and crates marked with no language they recognized." Taji looked up. "And then they vanished. Or kept quiet." Nina grabbed one of the maps and unfolded it on the bench. It was hand-drawn again. A route traced from the base camp near Big Water, down through a narrow pass behind Antelope Wash. Coordinates marked with small X's. "We follow this," she said. "We find what's buried next." Cal shook his head. "You're not thinking of doing this alone." Taji stood. "We're not waiting for permission anymore." "There could be dangerous people out there," Cal said. "If this was a cover-up tied to military contractors or worse, then they've had 40 years to clean it up." Chaska snapped. "And they didn't. Because they thought no one would ever come looking." Taji rolled the map up, sliding it into his coat. "We leave at dawn." Cal let out a long breath, then nodded. "I'll meet you by the ridge." "You just resigned," Nina reminded him. "Doesn't mean I stopped caring." They all stood in silence a moment, watching the fires burn lower. Then Chaska spoke, his voice soft. "We found the graves, but the wound's still open." Taji nodded. "Then we keep going until it stops bleeding." Above them, clouds gathered over the horizon. Not storm clouds, just thick and low. Like something waiting, watching. The kind of sky that held its breath. And beneath it, the desert was no longer quiet. Not all graves are marked with stones. Some are kept alive by silence and threat. The wind swept hard over the ridge as dawn broke the sandstone cliffs painted pale orange in the weak winter light. Taji adjusted the straps on his pack, watching the sun rise slow over the jagged skyline to the east. The air smelled of sagebrush and dust, the ground still frozen beneath the crust of frost. Behind him, Nina tightened her jacket, eyes locked on the narrow trail ahead. Chaska leaned against the hood of the truck, arms crossed, boots tapping against the gravel in a rhythm that sounded too much like nerves. "You sure this is the right pass?" he asked. Taji unfolded the hand-drawn map again. The marker's here. Antelope Wash runs through the low basin, and the trail splits at the Cedar Grove. That's where we start. Cal pulled up last his old county rig trailing dust and a rattling tailpipe. He stepped out slowly, still wearing his sheriff's jacket despite the resignation. No badge now, just the coat and the weight of a man who'd seen too much and never said enough. "You didn't have to come," Taji said. "I know," Cal replied, shouldering a worn rifle. "But if I'm going to stand for anything before I go, it ought to be this." They crossed the ridgeline, single-file boots crunching over frost-bitten stone, the terrain narrowing into a canyon throat choked with brush and thyme. Cola trotted ahead, nose down, leg healed enough to move at a slow trot. The dog didn't bark, didn't whine, just led, like he knew where they were going. After 3 miles, the landscape changed. The canyon widened, trees thinned, and rock gave way to sandy floor. The air grew still, not silent, just watchful. Chaska stopped short. "This is it." Taji followed his gaze. Embedded in the wall ahead, barely visible beneath a cover of lichen and dust, was a rusted hatch. Not a door. A hatch, military-grade, circular, welded into the stone like it didn't belong to any natural place. Nina stepped forward, brushing back a layer of dirt. "Jesus." "It's real," Taji muttered. Chaska crouched beside the seam. "It's locked." "Not for long," Cal said, kneeling beside him. He reached into his jacket and pulled out an old key ring, 7 keys, all corroded, labeled in faded pen. He held up one marked Outpost B. "You've had this the whole time?" Nina asked. "Didn't know what it was for," Cal replied. "Figured if the time ever came, I'd know." He slid the key into the mechanism. It turned with a groan. The hatch unsealed with a hiss of old pressure. The air that spilled out was sour, metallic, and dry. They descended into the dark. The tunnel was narrow and steep, carved like a mine shaft, with concrete walls and steel braces every 20 feet. Old lights lined the ceiling, dead now. Taji's flashlight beam cut through layers of dust and cobwebs, revealing faded signage and peeling paint. "Authorized personnel only. Delta Project Site 12. "Delta Project," Nina whispered. "Sounds like Cold War intel," Chaska said. "Or a cover name." As they walked deeper, the temperature dropped. The tunnel ended at a heavy steel door. A keypad blinked red beside it, dead from age. But the door had been left slightly ajar, jammed by a rock the size of a fist. Cal looked at it. Someone was in a hurry. Taji pushed the door open with both hands. Inside the chamber was massive. Concrete flooring, rusted shelves, and rows of long decayed crates, stamped with partial serial codes. The ceiling was low, and dust floated like fog in the beams of their lights. They moved slowly, checking labels. Some crates held nothing but empty shell casings. Others were packed with old communication gear, reels of film and files so brittle they fell apart at a touch. In the far corner, a desk sat beneath a shattered light fixture. On it, a single thick folder, sealed in plastic. Nina picked it up. "Operation Hollow Mesa," she read. Taji opened the folder. Inside were black and white photographs, aerial images, maps of the Navajo Nation with grid overlays and handwritten notes in the margins. One photo showed a truck convoy entering a canyon. Another, blurred and grainy, showed men in fatigues unloading long barrels, not standard military issue. Beneath that, pages of notes, chemical logs, weapon testing data. A name appeared over and over again at the top of authorization forms. Hastian Nez Taji gripped the folder tighter. He ran this. It wasn't just him overseeing the op. He commanded it. Chaska leaned over his shoulder. They were testing weapons here, Nina scanned the notes. Not just testing, storing, moving unlicensed gear through tribal lands illegally. Using covert units to hide it, Cal added. If Yazzie found out. He tried to stop it, Taji finished. And so did Red Horse. Nina turned the last page. At the bottom, a list of code names, each paired with an initial. Eagle, HN Coyote, TN Raven, CB. Taji froze. CB. Nina whispered. Cal Begay. Cal's face went pale. I didn't know, he said. I swear to you I didn't know what this was. I thought I was just backing recon. Then why is your name on the chain of command? Chaska asked. I don't know, Cal said, voice tightening. Unless someone forged the authorization or added me after the fact. I never signed anything for this. Taji didn't look away. Then we find the rest. We bring it out. They gathered every intact document, sealed them in Nina's pack, and took photographs of the rest. As they worked, the wind outside picked up, whistling down the shaft behind them. Then Kola barked once sharp. Taji turned. From the tunnel's mouth a voice echoed, "That's far enough." A man stepped into view. Middle-aged, dressed in modern tactical gear, not military issue. His face was lined and sun-darkened, jaw clenched tight. Behind him, two more men emerged, armed. You don't want to be in here, the lead man said. This isn't your business. Taji stepped forward. This land is our business. The man raised his weapon. So is cleaning up the mess you just stepped into. And in that moment, Taji knew this wasn't over. They had stirred something older and more dangerous than they'd realized. Something that had never stopped guarding the silence. Some truths don't just fight to stay hidden, they fight back. The air in the tunnel turned to lead. Taji's hand instinctively reached for his sidearm, but the man with the tactical vest had already raised his rifle, chest high. Behind him, the other two shifted position, flanking the narrow entrance of the underground chamber. There was no mistaking their posture. They weren't bluffing. They were trained, practiced, and prepared to make anyone disappear who wandered too deep. Nina stiffened beside him, her fingers barely touching the edge of her coat. Her eyes flicked toward the map still in her bag. The evidence, the documents, everything they'd uncovered. We're not here to make trouble, she said, voice even. We're leaving. The lead man didn't lower his weapon. You should have turned around at the ridge. Cal stepped forward slowly, hands in plain sight. I'm Sheriff Cal Begay. These people are under my protection. No, you're not the man, said coolly. You resigned. His words hit like a slap. They'd been watching, listening. Taji took one step forward, just enough to shield Nina and Chaska. Who are you? The man didn't answer. You working for the government? Taji pressed. Private contractors, or are you just what's left of a program they buried? The man's silence said everything. Behind Taji, Chaska spoke low. There's 3 of them. One narrow entrance. We can't get pinned down here. We won't, Taji muttered. He took one slow breath and stepped toward the lead man again. You're not going to kill 4 civilians in an unmarked federal site. You'd never dig us all out. And you'd have to explain the smell when it leaks through the canyon. The man didn't blink. You think this is the first time someone said that to me? I think you're running out of places to bury people, Taji said. A long moment passed. Then Kola growled. Not loud, but guttural, primal. In a flash, Chaska shifted sideways, pulled a smoke canister from his belt, one of the old military-issue types he kept from his father's storage box, and slammed it hard into the concrete. The crack and hiss filled the room instantly, and white smoke poured through the tunnel like floodwater. "Go," Cal shouted. They bolted. Taji grabbed Nina by the arm and ducked low, weaving through shelves as gunfire cracked off the concrete walls. Sparks flew. Steel shattered. He heard Chaska's boots pounding just behind him, Kola barking furiously in the chaos. They found a side exit, a maintenance hatch tucked behind rusted storage drums. Taji wrenched it open with his shoulder, kicking the frame until the hinges cracked. The tunnel behind it was narrower, descending at an angle, no lights, just rough earth and pipe brackets overhead. They ran. Smoke followed them like a second skin. They didn't stop until they burst out into sunlight through a drainage culvert a half-mile downslope. Taji hit the ground first, then turned to help the others out one by one. Nina collapsed beside him, coughing. Chaska rolled onto his back, eyes wild. Cal was last dragging the steel hatch shut behind them. Silence, except for their gasping breaths and the wind racing across the wash. Then Kola emerged, limping but unharmed. They sat in the dirt for a full minute before anyone spoke. "I told you it wasn't over," Chaska said, voice rasping. Nina pulled the folder from her pack, now streaked with ash and dirt. "We still have it. It's all here." Taji looked back at the ridge above. No sign of pursuit yet, but that didn't mean they were safe. Whoever those men were, they weren't going to forget this. "They'll try to find us," Cal said. "Let them," Taji replied. "But we go first." He rose to his feet, brushing off gravel and blood from a shallow cut on his arm. His body ached, but his mind burned clear now. There was no more room for hesitation, not after what they'd seen. "We get to the radio," he said. "We call in help." "Who?" Chaska asked. "The feds." "No," Taji said. "Our people. Press. Council. The tribe. If we put this in the open, they can't bury it again." They made their way down the canyon, staying close to the rock walls and out of sight. It took them an hour to reach the old weather tower that stood just above Red Earth Mesa, a long-defunct ranger station, with a ham radio antenna still wired to a backup solar rig. Cal had used it before to send distress signals when cell towers failed in monsoon season. The wind up there was stronger. The land stretched out wide, endless. From the tower, they could see the full reach of the canyon, the path they'd come from the shadows of men still guarding ghosts. Inside the shack, Taji flipped open the transmitter. Static. He turned the dial slow. Then faint but real voice chatter. Nina adjusted the gain. "This is Nez team calling open line code gray." "Repeat, Nez team requesting open line code gray." The static shifted. A voice came through. "Copy. Identify location." Taji grabbed the mic. "Red Earth Mesa. Coordinates to follow. We have evidence of unauthorized federal activity on tribal lands. Documents, photos, eyewitnesses. Possible security threat. Need secured line and press contact. Now." "Stand by," the voice said. Then a different voice came through. Calm. Confident. Female. "This is Agent Torres with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. We've been tracking your signal. Hold position. Do not engage. We're on our way." The line went dead. Taji looked at the others. "They're listening." "Good," Nina said. "Let them." From the ridge far in the distance, a black SUV crested the edge of the wash. It paused just for a second, then reversed slowly, disappearing into the canyon's throat. Taji narrowed his eyes. They were pulling back. For now. But the fight was shifting. It wasn't just about memory anymore. It was about exposure, power, legacy, and the war hadn't ended in 1979. It had only ever gone quiet. Justice in the end isn't about revenge, it's about making silence impossible. The wind had shifted over Shiprock. It carried the kind of stillness that comes only after something long hidden breaks through the surface. At the base of the old community center under the wide morning sky, the tribal flag rose half-mast, its edges rippling like a heartbeat in slow motion. Taji stood beneath it, with Kola at his side, the old shepherd steady on his feet again. The pain in the dog's leg hadn't gone away, but he didn't limp anymore. Not when Taji moved with purpose. A dozen folding chairs had been set up in the yard. Local press had come. Veterans, too. Not many at first, but enough to mark the beginning of something bigger. Elders leaned on canes wrapped in Pendleton wool. Children sat quiet at their feet, eyes wide, listening without knowing yet how deeply the stories would live in them. Beside the podium, a table held the box of documents sealed now in a protective case. Above it, a framed photograph, Yazzie Redhorse, Thomas Nez Cal Begay, and Hastian Nez all lined up in fatigues, their expressions frozen in history's teeth. Nina adjusted the microphone as the last few guests arrived. Chaska stood just behind her, arms crossed back straight, his father's field medal clipped to his jacket. Taji stepped forward when Nina nodded. He looked out over the faces before him. People who'd lost sons and fathers to wars they couldn't name. People who'd lived beneath the weight of unanswered questions for 40 years. "My name is Taji Nez," he said, voice clear, no paper in his hand. "Some of you know me. Some of you know the men in that photo. All of you know silence. We've lived with it for too long." He glanced down at Kola, who watched him with the same quiet loyalty as always. "We came looking for closure. What we found was betrayal. Not just on some foreign battlefield, but here on our land. Our elders were used to cover operations they didn't authorize. Our warriors were turned against one another. And when they spoke up, they were buried. Literally." He paused. "I found my grandfather's name at the top of the chain of command. I found my father's orders scribbled in the margins. And I found the truth sitting in dirt-stained crates no one was ever meant to open. But they were opened. And now we don't get to look away." A hush held over the crowd. The weight of lineage pressed down. It didn't crush. It steadied. "We've sent the evidence to the proper agencies. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has opened an inquiry. The Department of Defense has acknowledged receipt. But whatever comes of that, he gestured to the gathering, this is our justice." He stepped back. Nina took the mic next. She didn't speak loudly. She didn't need to. "I'm not here as a soldier's granddaughter. I'm here as someone who understands how pain lives in families. And I'm here to say we're done swallowing that pain." She turned to the elders in the front row. "We ask you to bless the path ahead, not to fix the past, but to make sure our children never carry the same silence we did." An elder rose slowly, Ruth Yazzie. Her frame was thin, but her voice cut through the still air. "Today we name the names. We speak the truth. That's the only ceremony some of our dead will ever get." One by one, others stood. Veterans saluted. A drummer began a soft rhythm from the edge of the crowd. Just one hand, one skin drum echoing like a second heartbeat beneath the earth. Cal approached the podium last. He didn't wear his badge, but his presence still bore weight. The crowd watched him in silence. "I should have told you all this a long time ago," he said. "But I didn't. I was afraid. Afraid of what I'd lose, who I'd hurt. I thought loyalty meant silence. He looked down at the photo. But loyalty without truth is just a slow death. He stepped away without another word. Taji met him halfway, and for a moment, the two men simply stood, no handshake, no hug, just the shared understanding of men who had crossed the line between guilt and responsibility. Later that afternoon, beneath the shadow of the sacred peak, they buried the final piece, a third grave, unmarked except for a small stone placed at its head. Taji stood with Chaska and Nina, the sky wide and endless above them. He didn't get a name, Nina said softly. He got the truth, Chaska replied. That's more than most. Taji placed the final artifact into the earth, a single dog tag, pitted and bent, marked only with a scratched X. They covered it with care. Then they walked away, not because it was finished, but because it was finally begun. By dusk, the trucks were gone. The wind returned. Only the sound of pinions creaking and sage brushing across stone remained. Taji sat on the tailgate of his truck, watching the horizon. The map from Red Horse's field pack sat rolled beside him. The routes marked on it didn't end where they thought. There were more sites, more names. But not tonight. Tonight, they had made the silence speak. And tomorrow, they would make sure it never returned.